Okay, well, good afternoon all, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Architect Your App for Success. I'm Curtis Roach, Marketing Manager for mkodo, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. As the title suggests, today we're going to be discussing app architecture and what it really takes to create a truly successful app in today's market. A bit of housekeeping before we start. Please remember that this is an interactive session, so there'll be opportunities for you guys to submit any questions that you have, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible, time permitting, of course. And also, please be aware that this session will be available on demand after the session is over. So please, again, feel free to check it out after or share with any of your friends or colleagues. That would be great. And for those of you who want an even deeper insight into player experience for commercial gaming, just to draw your attention to our handout section where we have an exclusive mkodo white paper available for download. So please make use of that as you will. And before we get directly into the first question, I think it might make a good start just to go around our esteemed panel. It'd be great for you guys to introduce yourselves, a little bit of a line about your interest in this topic, and then we'll get straight into it. So if you don't mind, can we start with you, Stu?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stuart Godfrey. I'm the founder and technical director of mkodo. And obviously, being the technical director of mkodo, I have a bit of a passing interest in apps, app architecture, and the middleware that supports such. I spend most of my days talking to my clients, talking to my prospects about the best way and the best approach to implementing and enhancing current product and building new apps and websites for our clients.
Brilliant. We'll just go around as I see you on my screen. Jonathan?
Yes, afternoon everyone. Group CIO of the Rank Group. So for those of you who don't know who Rank Group are, we look after Grosvenor and Mecca. So Grosvenor Casinos and Mecca Bingo, large venue base, but also online. We also have a number of other products and services that we have, and we're also out in Spain and looking to venture further afield. From my perspective, I'm a consumer of mkodo's products and app services. So for me, I'm interested in what they have to offer, how I can make the most amount of money from these apps.
Fantastic. And last but not least, James?
Sorry, James, your audio's...
Oh, he's gone. Okay, well, what we'll do, just as we give James a chance to dial back in, I think we'll just start with the initial question, get the conversation going, and allow James to jump back in when he has a chance to get back. So, Stuart, what is your definition of a successful app?
Well, I think there's several definitions of a successful app, and I think it really depends on whether you're the consumer or the purchaser of it. So whether you're John, but let me give it from the mkodo point of view. So one of the ways that we grade on the success of our app is kind of multifold. But one of the great things about apps, and one of the bad things about apps, is they are public forum pieces of software. If you promote them through an app store, which invariably you do, the only option is with Android potentially not to do that, is you have app store review process. And so as a business, if our apps aren't at least 4 stars plus, we would consider it not to be a successful app. And one of the things that makes an app successful is fundamentally how your customers approach it, how they use it, and how they kind of desire it. And one of the interesting things about an app that is very, very different from a website is that people will always have a preference to use an app than a website, and there's lots of studies related to that and why that is the case. But people having something installed on their phone has a greater level of belonging and worth to them than a website, which they approach through a web browser. Especially when we see, of course, that people do so infrequently bookmark web pages, as we all know that even to find a regularly visited website, they still use Google search to get there. And I have to say, I'm equally as guilty as anybody. So from our point of view, the success fundamentally is how the customer consumer experiences that, because then that shows the overall success to our clients. Our clients will obviously have a slightly different view on it, and that will be the amount of money they've made out of it. But from our point of view, it is the customer experience that determines to us whether it is successful or unsuccessful.
Brilliant. And Jonathan, from your perspective, what is a successful app? Is it one that just makes loads of money, or is there other aspects to it as well?
Of course,
Brilliant.
we're in a fairly unique. Rank is in an industry where it's heavily regulated, and on top of that, Apple like to put, in my view, unreasonable demand or restrictions on the apps as they're pushed through the store for approval. So for us, we need to ensure that the apps are compliant. First of all, we need to protect our customers and make sure that we are promoting and managing safer gambling appropriately. We need to make sure that they are accessible. In an evolved world, as we move forward, we're interested in the omni-channel opportunity and capability that apps bring. A customer has a phone in every customer now pretty much has a phone in their pocket. We want to drive demands to our websites, but equally drive demand and get people into our venues. So for me, it's about that omni-channel experience, but also simplifying some of these journeys as well. You look at the registration journey of an app like, I don't know, Monzo has always been a good one to look at, in the way that you register for a Monzo credit card. That journey for registration is brilliant, right? And ideally, you kind of want to mimic that across all of them and simplify as much as possible. Equally, depositing funds, we want customers to be able to deposit money to us very easily and quickly. So, and it's an evolving piece, right? You're always going to have new products and new features that you're going to want to release. So it's not just about building an app and putting it into the store. It's then about how do you evolve it in the right way. And that's why we rely on people like, the people within mkodo to guide us in some of those right directions. Those guys have got the advanced warning of what the new features are coming with the next Apple version are and how we can benefit from it, that sort of thing. So it's a moving beast. Difficult question to answer, but
yeah,
I hope that helps.
Yeah, just to expand on that a little bit, because I think you raised a really good point, actually, John. Is that the market in apps is actually quite complex, particularly in regulated markets. In fact, I think the word "quite" is rather an understatement, and I think you and I we both had conversations about this over the recent months, particularly with this whole Apple, what we call 4.7 piece, where side-loaded games are now no longer allowed. But as a business, we spend a huge proportion of our time working with the App Store release process, and whether it's Apple or Google. And for both of those, it's considerably more complex for a gaming restricted product than it is from a standard store related product. In other words, a 3+ rating product, 3+ years rating product. And that's something that when you're creating an app for success, it's also part and parcel of what you need to consider is whether that product actually meets the regulations, that you are compliant not only with the regulations or the guidelines as the particular store defines, but also what your regulator, because obviously this is an SBC based webinar, and therefore people are probably more interested in regulated products than unregulated products in this particular webinar. So it's a good point that John makes. It's not just about building an app that the consumers think is wonderful. It's also about how you build that with inside the controls that are enforced on you by your regulator, and also the regulation of the App Store. Okay,
brilliant. James, great to have you back.
Hey, thank you for having me. Sorry about that.
No worries at all. No worries. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here too.
Good. I think we were just about to get to you and for you to kind of introduce yourself and your kind of take on this topic. And while you're at it, maybe you could talk about maybe what your idea of a successful app is.
Well, thank you. Firstly, my intro. I work for Kambi. I've worked for Kambi for 4 years. I'm have a technical background from a programmer up into management levels of technology. But for the last 4 years, I've worked in the commercial division within Kambi, and my role is really to talk around the Kambi product, the APIs, what we enable our customers to do. We enable the differentiation to be built out on the Kambi core platform. So I hope I've got a kind of a good background in the sports space. To answer kind of what I think is a good app, I mean, I feel that it's got to be engaging, right? So let's start at the obvious stuff. It's got to be engaging, but I think that means it's got to be engagement in real time. You've got to have really good quality information, really good quality data. It's got to be consistent. It's got to have that kind of, a user has to really feel that they trust that app. And I think that is something that sometimes we take for granted, that trust of something is going to work when you ask it to do something. When you place, in the case of sports wagering, if you place a bet, you want it to go through. You don't want to have any technical kind of slowdown or things that you would start to doubt it. And I think at the really top level, that's very, very important, that people trust the app. And maybe in today's age, people don't trust things. So having something from a technology piece that works for them time in again is really important. And that consistent user experience that Jonathan mentioned in terms of the user experience is obviously key. But I would just add that kind of that it's consistent and people trust it. So that would be my key kind of piece.
Excellent. Okay, and then on to the next question. What is middleware, and why is it so important? I think again we'll start with you, Stuart, on this one. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, actually, that's almost. This is almost like we rehearsed this, but this actually segues into something really nicely that James was talking about, which is performance. So one of the interesting things about apps is one of the main reasons why people prefer an app is they generally consider them to be more performant than a website. And the irony, of course, is that an app and a website get their data from the same place. That's the reality. But it is just the presentation layer that is stripped away. So whereas a browser-based product will have a lot of presentation material around it to vend the experience, the app does all the presentation locally, and it's just the data that it needs to get down the wire, as it were. And hopefully it's not the wire that James was struggling with earlier today. In fact, we've all been struggling with network today. So one of the ways of making sure that apps are extremely performant is to have a level of middleware in between them. And in fact, middleware, if it's optimized, will actually help with websites. But one of the most important things that you can do with middleware is to aggregate the data services together. And the thing that kills websites and it also kills apps is where you have the data being provided in multiple API, what we call API calls, so that rather than the data piece coming down in one big chunk for the product to then render, it comes down in lots of little chunks. And the problem with all those lots of little chunks is they have a lot of weight, a lot of excess weight, which is exactly what I've had since lockdown. But they have a lot of excess weight that is unnecessary at the front and behind them. And so one of the things that middleware does, and what mkodo middleware does, is it does something called aggregation. So you make a call from the app through middleware to the data services downstream, which could be, for example, Kambi data services. And what we actually do is if, for example, on login, when you do a login function, that there's lots of data that you actually need. So one of the main ones, of course, is you want to authenticate the person. But that actually, from a presentation layer, is only half the story. In fact, it's a fraction of the story, because once you've logged in, the app and the website would want to present, generally it says, welcome back, James, or welcome back, John. Your last login was this date. Your balance is this. Your free bet spend is this. Your session timer is this. That's a lot of data. And generally what we see is each one of those pieces of data is a separate method call. And can slow the app performance down, and in fact, it slows the website down. So what we do in middleware is we aggregate all those components together into one method call, and that's exactly what we do for Rank. They have lots of different types of API services because they have lots of different partners, and we join those all together and create a consolidated API method to the app, which increases the performance immeasurably. And one of the main reasons it does that is because our network connection from our data services to their data services are somewhat more robust and faster than the same network connections from our data services downstream to a person's app, because they're going to be on GSM or Wi-Fi or what have you. So middleware really contributes to the performance and the enjoyment and the experience of an app, and equally would do the same for a website.
Brilliant. Jonathan, any thoughts on that at all?
Oh, I've got a view on this. So sports betting is a great example of why you need a middleware layer. So
Okay.
you take Kambi's data feed, right? You've got in-play events, football in play, where data is being pushed and prices are changing constantly, right? If you haven't got that middleware layer and your pages aren't rendering fast enough to change and update that data, your prices are out of date on the site. Simple as that. And your punters are either getting annoyed because they're not getting the price that they're being rejected for being able to place a bet, or we're losing money because we're giving prices that no longer exist. Football matches change so rapidly. You need that speed and that expedience to be able to update the data on your sites. Sports betting has been the biggest problem for me over the last 10 years, getting that right and working it well, because the potential for loss of income is so great.
Understood. And James?
Yeah, I think, and it's interesting to hear Jonathan and then the take on sports betting there, because I think it is a really challenging vertical in the data that's coming through. And Stuart, it'd be interesting to hear your views on this. I don't think there are any other verticals that maybe push quite so much data continuously into an app. There's nothing on the, there's nothing pre-rendered about sports wagering. There's nothing that I can build and put into an app. That it has to come from the live data sources, which are coming, for those who don't, see, how it works through, that's coming directly from the event, right? From the referee's chair, the umpire's chair in tennis, to, people at the ground watching the game. That's where this data flow starts from. So it is live, but, and I would, Stuart, have you got what would you say on that in terms of other apps? I mean, other verticals, is sports wagering right up there?
So a little bit of history. The first sort of regulated market we ever got into was sportsbook, and I have to say, been a technologist, a bit of a geek. I actually love the technology around sportsbook because it's so challenging.
Yeah,
it's so unbelievably difficult. Because you're absolutely right. If you don't get the sporting data accurate to the customer, and every time they try to place a bet, they will say, "Oh, price change," and they will get sent back and revolved. And then after a while, they just get fed up and go.
Yeah.
Or otherwise, you allow a certain level of tolerance in the pricing so that they can place the bet, but then you have huge risk associated to that. So potentially, you've provided a better price on an event than really you should do, and then of course, we all know where you're going to be if that wins, because effectively you're having to pay out more than you needed to, and so you're exposed to risk, which is I know something that John particularly is always very concerned about. But that is also one of the great challenges as technologists is how do you get around that? And I have to say, apart from stock trading, which is kind of similar. But I would actually say that the price changing on a sport event changes even more frequently than a volatile stock or share. There is nothing like it. It is so exciting and interesting, and you can just see that some people get this really right, and it's nothing to do ultimately with the sporting data vendor necessarily. It's all to do with the presentation layer. And one of the things that we find out, and it's all about making a good experience, is sometimes, and I don't know who all the audience is, so I dare say I'm going to insult some people, but what you often do find is that the UX guys get carried away and create actually some really exciting user experiences, but unfortunately those clutter and make more complex the data loading. So part of the challenge there is how do you deliver an entertainment app? Because sportsbook betting is like bingo, it's like casino, it's like lottery. It's an entertainment product, but also it's a very sophisticated technology product as well. So how do you make that compromise between giving somebody an enjoyable user experience, but making sure you're giving them the right timely data? And again, half of that is down to proper architecting of the front end and proper architecting of the downstream services.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, Stuart, the kind of comparison you actually made, saying it might even be similar to stocks and trading, because I think the added dynamic to this vertical is of course, the fact that it's happened within a regulated market. And of course, financial markets are another industry that's very heavily regulated. So I'd like to ask you guys, how does the added dynamic of operating within a regulated market impact the approach to developing an app? I know that the two technical guys here are, Stuart and James, and of course, Jonathan, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, Stuart, on this as well, in terms of, just the difference that makes.
I'm going to be naughty, and I'm going to say Jonathan, because
Yeah,
you're an operator.
I'm certainly not as technical as these guys. You're absolutely right. Regulated markets. So, look, everything that we do.
Has he frozen?
Okay. Forefront of all of that is.
Oh, he's back.
So we lost you for a second there, Jonathan. There you go. So
everything we do is based around safer gambling, right? And protecting the customer, adherence to GDPR, adherence to security. So for me, it's almost a core set of requirements are linked to at the start of any new build or any app. The core set of requirements are linked to the regulations that we have around it. Because if those aren't in place from the beginning, we ain't going live with that product. And if we do, there's a risk we'll get fined or shut down. I'm personally liable for the license that Rank holds to be able to bet, to be able to offer this product to the customer. Therefore, it's in my interest to make sure that Stuart and the team don't mess that up for me and end up with me being locked up, because that could absolutely happen if we don't get it right.
And I think that pressure, actually, that is a fair amount of pressure, Jonathan, on your shoulders there, I would say. And I hope that's probably why you choose good partners to alleviate that. And I think from a technical perspective, we need to make sure that we, and at Kambi we do this. So, for example, in terms of the regulated markets, there may be different rules there are different rules per different jurisdictions. It may be that you're not allowed to wager on certain sports. You're not allowed to wager on certain events within a sport. It may be that you're not allowed to on certain age categories, right? So there's all those different kind of regulatory nuances per regulatory area. And
Spanish market is different to the UK market, which is different to the Portuguese market and the Greek market. So you've all got they've all got their own nuances and own demands as well.
Yeah. And I think probably if you've got a group of companies within who've all got that kind of, you've got the responsibility, you need to ensure that again, you've got partners who can do it across all of those, so you don't have a weakest link, as it were. So I think the regulation piece is, again, it comes back to trust, but in quality of the data. But actually, at a technical level, I think it's interesting because it might be that you have different data that then, or lacking data, right? So if you've got a market that has restrictions that you're not allowed to offer certain, in-play combinations or certain in-play bet offers, that will change your UX because you're not allowed to offer those. So you have to make those decisions, and you have to make sure that still feels like the same look and feel, but you've just not got that those elements within it, and in a very polished way. This isn't just turning off and having a gap in the screen, or something. It's a big, it has to be in a this is a competitive space. It is difficult. We said that there's challenges to do it for sure, but this is a competitive space. And if you don't bring your kind of A game all the time, people are going to leave you. And I think that again, the ease of people transitioning between suppliers means that it is just, the pressure is on all the time to ensure that they have a good experience.
That's right. I mean, friction to move is very low for consumers. One of the things that can actually help with increasing friction is the quality of the product that they leverage. And what we have found in certain markets is that you can actually provide a slightly worse pricing value in your sports events if you've got a better quality product than the competitor who's offering the slightly better pricing, because people have preferred apps or preferred websites that they want to use. So this is actually quite an interesting area, whereas it isn't just the price that influences these people, and even that bubbles up right to the VIP. And if you give the VIP the right level of tooling, the very important person, bettor,
no, let's call them that
or
anymore.
gamer.
not allowed to call them that anymore in this industry.
Are we not? So the more frequent bettor, even those people are not as price conscious as you would think they are. They are tooling conscious. So the product that you give them is their major priority. So if you give them a way for them to entertain themselves more efficiently and effectively than your competitor, that is competitive advantage.
It comes back to that trust issue, Stuart. And I think this is why,
So.
Jonathan, and your brands like Rank are so well trusted, in that you know that this is a solution. This is an experience that is going to be seamless for you. It's going to be easy to transact. Coming back to that point, by the way, in terms of kind of delays, one of the things is that from a sports wagering perspective, in that for example, we need to make sure that the data is real time into the app. Again, making sure this experience is really seamless for people. And if that price, and if you have to ensure that the experience is not broken by the fact that if the prices are wrong, it's going to get rejected, right? And so that comes back to this trust issue. I'd like to talk, and maybe we've got some questions about how we can do that architecture, how we can kind of help in terms of the domain model, how we can talk about the data, how we can talk about the APIs, and I know we've got some stuff coming up. But again, I think that data flow matched with the UX through that middleware is just so important, and it's the building blocks to all of the good stuff on top.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, talking of building blocks, that does lead me quite nicely onto my next question. In regards to app development and considering the most important aspects of that, when you're thinking about ensuring high performance, what would you say are those building blocks? What are the key points to consider to kind of ensure that high performance? And does it vary according to sportsbook or casino or lottery, or is there a general consensus throughout the genre, the verticals? James, would you like to go?
I'll go first, but I would be really interested on the other verticals. So I'll take this from a sportsbook perspective.
Yes.
I mean, I think for me, it's the domain model has to be really well understood. And it is a complex thing. There are multiple hierarchies in that model, from sport, league, game, event, down to the bet offers, down to, and you've got to keep them all up to date. So the model in the first place has to be really well understood. And you then have to ensure and understand how you can communicate back into that app. And you can do that through multiple different ways. So if we're talking about sports wagering and sports betting, you can update data when the app loads, but actually a couple of seconds later, it's out of date. So how do you keep that in sync? So we talk, we've got different ways of doing that, whether that's web sockets, whether that's traditional sockets, whether that's into a middle layer. And then you look at the data. So for me, what does the data look like? How can you efficiently transport that data? What is the most efficient way of doing that? Are you sending through long field names, for example? It goes down to that level of detail to make it as efficient as possible to transmit that information in, because without the data, I would say that everything else is going to, without really fast data, and both from when it loads and then keeping it up to date into sync, everything else is going to fall down. If those two are not good, then the user experience is going to be bad. The look and feel will lag, as you were saying. If you've got stuff that just is laggy in terms of you interacting with it, it's not going to be great. So for me, it's just the most ruthless way of making that the most efficient piece, and there are multiple ways that we do that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to that, if I can. One of the interesting things there is that there are different types of data model that we see across the whole structure of gaming. So if we just look at things like casino and bingo, the level of data that actually comes down the wire to play that game is very small. It's very, very minimal. The one that probably generates the most data is actually live poker, because it's a video stream, and that definitely does need a good network connection for that type of thing. But the other one that is a data-driven model rather than a video-driven model that has a huge amount of data coming down is sportsbook. So the irony here is that sportsbook is without doubt the most data-driven product we see in this market, bar none. And in fact, the gaming-based products that we see have hardly any data needed to drive the experience, because the experience is all built into the gameplay. So once the game is downloaded, and whether that's a native game or an HTML game, kind of doesn't matter. Once that game is downloaded, and whether that's into your browser or into your app, the actual gameplay is all local, and there's hardly any interaction down the wire at all. In fact, it's just the predetermined result that actually gets sent down to the device. So again, architecting and developing the user experience is significantly different between a sportsbook type of product and then a gaming-based product. And generally, what we tend to find is that a gaming product is all about the UI experience. It's all about the animations, and sports is all about the data and how quickly you can get that data down and how clearly you can get that data down.
Brilliant. Jonathan, anything to add from a casino perspective?
No, not really. I mean, live casino, streaming, all that sort of stuff is consuming. The key really is just don't be too content rich with these apps, right? Don't overdo it. I think we said earlier on, you don't need massive images, slowing it down as well. So the rendering at the front end makes a difference as well.
One thing I did want to just kind of come back to you on, Stuart, in regards to what you were saying. Could a lot of the things that you were just talking about, could they not be done with a PWA?
Yeah, so we're now getting into religious wars, Curtis.
Okay.
So the religious wars of whether a PWA is better than an app or good enough. So PWA is a progressive web app, and a couple of years ago, it was the holy grail of how to develop your internet-focused product, your digital online internet-focused product. And in simple terms, what a PWA tries to do is it tries to have quite a lot of intelligence inside the browser. And one of the cool things about PWA is the concept of background processes, and the ability for it effectively to function even though it's not in focus. In other words, it's a background tab or what have you. And also one of the things it's supposedly be able to do is that when you get network loss, it will recover and will refunction and reorder the data, and life's good. But in fact, it's never really lived up to that promise, partly because as soon as it was developed, it realizes that on a mobile phone, it just gobbles battery. And in fact, pretty much every single handset manufacturer has effectively turned off all the background processing in their browser stack, because what was happening was people were using background processes, and before anybody knew it, their mobile phone that had a 12-hour battery life suddenly only had a 1-hour battery life, and the battery indicator was glowing red in 5 minutes. So they had to turn all these features off. So fundamentally, PWA now is just a JavaScript-based website.
Okay.
And a lot of the cool functionality that we were kind of hoping that would be delivered can now only be delivered through an app. And that is one of the reasons why apps are starting to get the focus again, now that the love affair with PWAs has somewhat ceased.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And I'm going to stick with you, Stuart, because on my next question, I know it's a topic that's close to your heart. What are your thoughts on code provenance and the impact this can have on app development going forward?
Okay. Well, in fact, if I could be a bit naughty, I'd just like to talk slightly broader before I get into that subject, because I'm just conscious of time. But, one of the things that John and I were talking about a little while ago was how there's something I call digital bridging, and that is how you bridge two different shores together. And by shores, I mean 4 shores on the water. So if you just imagine that you've got on one shore you've got retail, and on the other shore you've got digital, and how do you join those two shores together? And obviously, from a geographical point of view, we use a bridge. But in the digital world, what is that bridge? And it's your mobile phone. It's the thing that you carry, that you do your digital experience on, and also walks into the retail outlet with you. Certainly, you wouldn't be walking in there with your PC and probably very rarely your laptop, but you're walking there with your mobile phone. And so your mobile, and if it's running an app, it can create that bridge very, very successfully between the digital experience that, for example, Rank may have of you digitally with their Mecca Bingo brand, for example, then if you walk into a Mecca Bingo hall, then that experience can be joined together. And I just wonder whether John has a view on that he'd like to share with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, we want to create this omni-channel experience where a consumer can be in a venue, use their mobile device, leave the venue and transition to our online offering, and vice versa, creating a true omni experience for the customer. I think that's the pun intended mecca for all of us, really, is to create that a product that allows a customer to almost give us money at all opportunities, right?
I mean, one of the things that, of course, response, and absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we find, particularly with our lottery, so in the lottery world, they have something they call known play, and I don't know if anybody's particularly familiar with that. But and what lotteries do, lotteries are a multi-platform industry. So not only do they run your lottery, but they will run sportsbook, they will run casino, they will run bingo, and everything like that. But one of the things they have a real problem with is that they don't really have retail experiences. They have a location that people pop into and buy a lottery ticket. So they're not at all the sort of experiences that Rank have, for example, with their Mecca Bingo brand or Grosvenor Casino brand. Now, what they're trying to do is how can they get to know the person who comes in and buys with cash a lottery ticket? And the only way they really have any knowledge of their lottery players today, and this is to some degree the same with retail sports, although in some areas that's now changing. But is that they have somebody sitting in that retail environment doing surveys. That's the closest they can get to it. And obviously, not everybody's prepared to speak to somebody with a clipboard, and it's not really appropriate to do that in a COVID world. So one of the things that they're trying to do is utilize that digital bridge, the mobile phone, to understand that known play. So effectively what you do is, rather than going up and buying a lottery ticket with one of those little paper coupons that you fill in with those tiny short pencils that I can never hold properly, you do it through your mobile phone. You actually build your ticket up with your mobile phone, you show a QR code, and that then links your mobile phone to that purchase event. And we start to build up a profile with what we call known play. And that's the same sort of things we're trying to do in other retail sectors, including sportsbook as well, where you build your coupon up on your mobile device. You're still paying cash in the betting shop, but we're starting to create a level of known play between the retail experience and the digital experience that you're using with your mobile phone. And apps particularly help us doing that, because you can do it without any network activity. Once you've got the sporting data or your lottery balls that you want to play with, you don't need to have a network connection. It's the app will still function 100% even though you're 30 feet underground. So again, that's one of the values of having not a network dependent product, which is what a website is.
Excellent. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I've got a. I think what's quite interesting, I think, from an app, and is also kind of the innovation around this, and obviously that's different in different verticals. But if you look at, say, something that Kambi have been doing, and obviously with mkodo as a partner as well, we have. We look at, say, let's look at the US market, where maybe regulations dictate that are certainly restrictive in terms of, it's not just like the UK where you can have wagering or betting in the country as a whole. It's per state, and within per state, that it might be within the casino, it might be outside the casino, in terms of where you can actually place a wager. So one of the things that Kambi have come up with, that in casinos that you're not allowed to have mobile wagering, we still have apps. Right, so we have apps then that you can do your bet selections. Now, this isn't, in the UK, wouldn't fit, but in the US, actually, it works really well. If you're in the casino environment, you can sit at the bar, you can have a drink, you can choose your bet selections, and somebody comes around and scans your phone and gives you a ticket. So actually, and again, that's powered through an app. That's not a website. It's through an app, right? So I think there's innovation in this space, and I think that it's actually maybe we need to innovate further. And I'm looking forward to what's going to happen in the next couple of years. Stuart, you were mentioning that it's come back to apps. I've certainly seen within the sports betting space a move to apps, to native apps, to people owning that. Can be obviously doing from a sportsbook point of view, powering that from a data perspective. But I think there's innovation coming in this space.
Yeah, I was actually I did a little bit of consultancy for a client a few weeks ago, and we were having a chat, and I was saying, why are you focusing on apps? Why are you talking to me? It's always a good icebreaker. And they've said that 70% of their customer base uses the app. So we have a website and we have the app, and 70% of our bettors, since it was a betting app, use the app. So out of preference, they use the app, and we have a 30% higher uplift per person on app than we do on the website. And I said, okay, let's carry on the conversation. Nothing more is needed to be said. When you see those sort of figures and people's propensity to want to use an app over a website, I think it speaks volumes. And the market has definitely changed over the last couple of years, where everybody said they could do everything with a website, and now they're starting to realize there is actually value and a return on investment that they get from having a proper omni-channel, multi-channel solution available to their customers.
Brilliant, thanks, Stuart. We've got just a little bit of time left, so I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple of more questions. But just carrying on from what you guys were talking about in terms of the trend towards, really seeing the value in having an app. Some companies will be looking at doing this in-house, or some companies will be looking at a third party. But I suppose I'd like to know from you guys, what are the advantages of using a third party for app development as opposed to an in-house team, or even using a generic app that might come included with some turnkey packages that are currently available in the industry? Would anyone like to tackle that question first?
I'm probably best placed to start, given that what we do. So take a look at all of you download the Mecca and Grosvenor app, have a play, have a punt. When you do that, the apps that you see we've managed to benefit from mkodo having built core parts of that platform without having to fund it ourselves. If I were to go and bring in my own developers to build an app from scratch to try and replace what exists today, A, it would cost me a fortune to get to where they are today, but B, I'd only be benefiting from the development that my teams do. Whereas with mkodo, I'm benefiting from the development that they do for other customers as well.
That's right.
So actually, I'm probably getting, from a cost point of view, it may be slightly more expensive to use mkodo, and that depends on how good you are at negotiating with Sue and the team. Although, I know she's on listening. But however, so it may end up costing you more than it will cost you to have in-house developers. However, in the long run, and the fact that you're almost obtaining an end-to-end service from a supplier, it probably works out cheaper or cost neutral, and you don't have that overhead and aggravation. One thing I hadn't considered until recently is that I'm reliant on people like Stuart keeping me out of prison. I'd forgotten, I kind of missed that aspect of it. But nevertheless, I can put that onus onto mkodo, and that becomes part of the because they have to keep me out of prison or whatever. Compliant,
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think both of us will look quite gorgeous in orange, which is the American colour for prisons. But of course, I'm not an operator, but I also actually hold a UK GC license, as an example, as a platform provider into this marketplace. So I am signatory on that license. Not quite as painfully as you are, John, to be fair, but we also have obligations, which is another thing that I find fascinating about this industry. I remember being once at a dinner party. I'll tell you a little story. I was at a dinner party, and if we were going around the table saying, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm in the betting, gaming, and lottery space." And there was kind of shock horror in there. And And I said, what's the shock? Oh, you're in gambling. And I said, gambling is one of the highest regulated industries on the planet. It's not to be ashamed at all. It is technically a fascinating industry to work in. The technology behind it is incredible. The regulation behind it is incredible. The amount of thought and views that the industry goes in to make sure that it is playing fair is significant and inordinate to any other industry, and I would even say even more so than the banking industry. And the banking industry has gone through quite a lot of turmoil since a few years ago, and it's getting its house in order. But the gaming industry has had I think a very cleanish house for a very, very long time, and is improving all the time with the responsibilities that it has to its customers.
Yeah, the morals attached to the gaming industry are, well, it's up to the individual to make their own decision. But you're right, heavily regulated. We do look after our customers. We do care about our customers. It's literally the main agenda item in every exec that I attend. So this conception that we're there to rob people is not true. And actually, it is more interesting than it. I've been in banking, I've been in insurance, I did the post office for a few years. It's all boring compared to gaming.
I agree, Jonathan. I agree. I mean, I can say the same. I think I've been in many different industries, publishing, search engines, building search engines, and that was fairly interesting from an academic point of view. But I think if you talk about sports gambling, I think it's just an amazingly interesting industry. And it's technically hard, right? Because you've got to be good at back end, you've got to be good at front end, you've got to be good at data, you've got to be, we've got big quant teams. If you look at Kambi, company of 1,000 people, and we've probably got up to 350, 400 developers, 400 people in trading. These are big teams, and I think that's probably across the the industry. There's a lot of clever minds at work. It's a difficult thing to get right consistently. Coming back to that point I made at the beginning, get it right. You can't just get it right once and think, oh, that's good enough. You have to get it right 24/7. Otherwise, you're going to people can go elsewhere, give bad experience, wrong prices, and all the rest of it. That the problems that brings. I think you have to be on top of it, truly 24/7. And I think that how many other industries maybe have that? Maybe banking does. Obviously, money's involved, right? You can't. But money's involved in gambling, so you've got that. Nobody's going to be very happy if you lose money, lose a wager, lose a bet, or it's gone missing into a system. You have to have trust in your systems.
Brilliant. So guys, this is going to be last question of the day. But just going off of what you also said again, Stuart, this is our industry, which is one of the highest regulated industries on the planet. And I just wonder, operating in regulated markets such as these means that rules governing the sector can change relatively quickly. How can an app be developed that is agile enough to cope with a constantly evolving digital landscape? Now, I know, James, is something that we've discussed previously. I mean, this is something that you've got any thoughts on initially?
I think, I mean, again, I think it comes back to you have to know you have to have faith in your suppliers. You have to understand that you're buying data. If you're buying data, you're buying data that's legal, that it's correct, that it's being managed correctly, that you're adhering to the regulations. But the regulations aren't just around sports wagers. They're also around regulations that Apple are saying you can, what can you have on your phone? Are you adhering to those? Are you? So I think it goes across, being able to react to those changes, whether from, in the UK specifically or in the US, it's a very much a dynamic space, and you have to, be on top of all of those things, both data and from a tech perspective. So that would be, it's a difficult thing to do. I don't think there are any shortcuts.
No shortcuts.
I've got a view on it. So from adhering to compliance related or regulatory related changes, it's very difficult to comment because you never know what curveball you're going to get from the Gambling Commission.
Yeah.
The ability to developer change that could come. It could be linked to the deposit journey. It could be linked to RG limits. It could be linked to whatever it may be. It's so unpredictable, it's difficult to gauge. Apple 4.7 is a good example of a pain in the arse compliance issue that you can mitigate for the future now, because the 4.7 regulation that's come in states that basically Apple don't like the fact that gaming companies have the ability to make changes to the app. So therefore, if you've got a HTML5 based wrapped app, it's possible for you to potentially change the algorithm that sits behind the game and therefore change the odds for the customer, which they didn't like. That's largely it, right, Stuart? Now, what that's resulted in is us having to invest significantly in nativizing, if that's a word, our gaming apps, so that we could prove to Apple that we weren't able to make those sort of changes on the fly. It could only ever be done.
Oh, it sounds like he was going to say something so interesting there.
Well, I think I know where John was going with this, because John and I converse quite regularly on this sort of subject. So fundamentally, there's two types of regulatory aspects to this industry, particularly if it's apps. Okay, and that was your question, Curtis.
Yeah.
So obviously, there's the regulation that we get from a regulator like UKGC or whoever, but there's also the regulation or guidelines that we get from the App Store, and they change. They don't quite change as frequently as I think people think. Sorry, so John, you were. I'm padding for waiting for you to get back. So you got back. We lost you.
You're back.
So you were saying about Apple 4.7 regulation was forcing you to nativize or actually embed games inside the product, and then that's when we lost you.
Yeah, and so what that's resulted in a huge amount of expense to convert our apps into a more nativized set of apps, right? Now we've done that, actually, we've kind of set ourselves up for the future quite nicely. But again, it's just another unpredictable curveball. The whole industry went down the HTML5 wrapped app route because in our minds, that was the future, right? And that was always going to be okay. Then all of a sudden it wasn't. So we're all scrambling around to try and make these relevant changes. I don't know. It's a difficult question. Honestly, it's a difficult question to answer because you never know what you can get through.
I think it's like a lot of this industry is and in some ways that makes it exciting, but also commercially it makes it difficult because we're in a situation here that the foundation or the fabric that we're trying to operate off is constantly changing from underneath us. And so we have to be adaptive. But this is a classic survival of the fittest type of thing. One of the problems that we all have in this is trying to second guess, because to do anything of any merit takes some time. And if you're not given sufficient time, and one of the biggest upheavals with 4.7, when Apple first tried to introduce it, in fact, just over 2 years ago now, was they gave us 3 months to get our house into order. And everybody said, you can't do this in 3 months. You're crazy. So they did relent. And actually, that's the first time I've really ever known Apple to relent. And I think they got sufficient. But that is a big problem generally within a regulated industry, is that you will get items forced upon you that you couldn't really see. You will suddenly get, you run the risk. For example, Boris Johnson could get harangued by some person in the street saying blah 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 about a gambling app, and the next thing he's trying to do is change the regulation on it because of a bit of vox pop voicing going on. Yeah, so and that is a real trouble when you have a governmental regulator fundamentally controlling what you can do in your business, and then you have a group of people in Cupertino, as an example, or Menlo Park for Google, making decisions based on industries thousands of miles away from them that they don't really understand.
And I think that's a really interesting point. And I think from Kambi's perspective, as we as a data supplier to sports, we also have clients, have a web client, and we work with people on native apps like mkodo. But we do that in multiple jurisdictions, so not just UK gambling. It's about in the US, it's about in Sweden, it's about in Australia, and there are many different. So it's kind of, you can see, obviously Android and Apple is fairly consistent, but again, I think that the combination of technical compliance and then kind of regulatory compliance. Those two together are difficult to do.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of proceedings for today. I'd just like to say, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this panel today. It's been very insightful. And to the viewers, thank you so much again as well for joining us. Please remember that this webinar will be available on demand after this broadcast. And also, please, if you have any further interest in digital insight, especially from a commercial gaming point of view, please do get in touch with mkodo. And also, we have a exclusive white paper available for download in your handout section. So please do make use of that and share amongst your colleagues. And yeah, thank you guys ever so much. And that's it for today. Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.